Good afternoon. This is Dr. Andreas Pliopoulos. It's Friday, February 11th, and I'm talking to you from Chicago, Illinois. The pandemic now is approaching 2 years in its duration. The limitations are being lifted. It's going into the endemic state, and life is gradually returning to normal. The purpose of this video is to address two aspects related to the pandemic, two aspects of it which have recently come up, one of them concerning one medication over the past few months that came to my attention that raises considerable concern in my mind about the way medical practice has changed here in the United States and internationally. And the second came up just over this past week of tremendous concern that I have about children and their health care related to pandemic issues. It's to the point that I, as a pediatrician, as a child neurologist, as a responsible physician and researcher, and as a parent, I feel an obligation to bring this material up to the public for public scrutiny and public comment. So that's the reason for this video. Before starting into the details of what I'm talking about, I just want to give a little bit of background information about myself, so you know that my ideas and my suggestions are coming from a solid basis of science, a solid basis of medicine and research. Somebody who's got more than 30 years of clinical experience in what I'll be talking about. I went to college and medical school at the University of Chicago, although I was born and raised in Toronto. My adult neurology training was at the Mayo Clinic, child neurology and pediatrics at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. Several years of research in neurodevelopmental issues and neuroimmunology at Laval University in Quebec City. Back to Toronto, where I was on faculty at the University of Toronto, having a research laboratory and providing clinical care to children at the Hospital for Sick Children as a child neurologist. My research work then branched off into aspects related to Alzheimer's disease. I was not able to continue that line of work in Toronto, so I moved back to the Chicago area some 30 years ago, where I established an Alzheimer's research laboratory and clinical program at Michael Reese Hospital, and eventually that moved over to Mercy Hospital. Most of my work here in Chicago, until I retired from clinical practice a decade ago, was in child neurology, taking care of primarily children with severe cerebral palsy and their overall general medical care needs. So I was their pediatrician in addition to their child neurologist. So that's my clinical background. In terms of my research that I've done, I've published 69 peer-reviewed publications. And I've been requested by 15 different medical journals to be a peer review consultant where I review articles submitted to them, whether they should publish them or not, or modify them. In terms of funding for research, oftentimes studies are expensive and funds are required. I've received almost, not quite, but $3 million over my career in terms of funding to support my research activities. And in terms of reviewing other people's research, was invited by a number of different institutions to review grant proposals for funding, and these include the Autism Society of America, several times by the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, the Wellcome Trust in the United Kingdom, the United States Department of Justice, and the United States Air Force. They have a special committee there overseeing research, and asked my opinion about a research proposal that was submitted. So I do have a lot of experience in evaluating research proposals and doing my own research and publishing things. Now, the first thing that I want to address is what I call GMI. It's a term, an acronym that I invented just the past few days. And I think should have been invented a long time ago, about over a year ago. We all know GMO. That stands for genetic modified organism. That relates to food items that are available in stores, and a lot of people are very sensitive to GMOs, and they don't want to have that in their diet, particularly in Europe. GMI stands for genetic material injections, injections of genetic material. And this is what I think should have been used to describe what is called vaccines that are being administered now to the tune of approximately 4 billion people in the world have received these things as GMIs. These are very, very different from all previous vaccines, and that's why I think the name should be changed. All previous vaccines in use take either the virus or bacteria that's been killed and use that as the substrate for the immune response, or take a attenuated version of the bug, where it's no longer pathogenic, won't produce illness, but it does carry the genetic epitopes that your immune system can recognize, or bits and pieces of the virus or the bacteria, and are injected in you, develop an immune response to that. This is different. What is being used is injection of viral genetic material. It's either RNA, ribonucleic acid, or DNA, deoxynucleic acid. The material is injected into your body. The viral genetic material gets into your cells. Your cells then take this genetic material, use it as the roadmap to build proteins. They produce the virus spike protein, which is then released into your circulation. Your body's immune system recognizes it as foreign material and develops an immune response to it. And it works, and it's very effective. And I'm very much in favor of adults receiving these injections, these GMIs. They decrease mortality tremendously, they decrease hospitalizations, and they have been very, very effective. I received my first shot within a week of it being available in Chicago a little over a year ago. I received both shots and then booster too. So I'm totally in favor of this program in place. My reservation comes up with children, where you have growing individuals and you're injecting foreign genetic material into their bodies. What are the long-term side effects? Now, we do know the short-term side effects. Those are monitored very closely, very reliably, and very correctly. We know about the thrombotic events that have taken place with some of these GMIs. We know about the pericarditis, myocarditis issues, and those are being monitored very responsibly. But what are the long-term ones when you're dealing with a child who then has a full lifetime ahead of them? Are there any possible side effects that one should be aware of? Well, it's entirely unknown. Incorrect statements are made that these have been around for several decades and that they're safe. That's not true. That's not true at all. It was only some 30 years ago that it was even conceived as an idea in your mind. And then the work was done in experimental animals. And rodent species are not the same as human beings. They're very, very different. In humans, this technology has been used in cancer, trying to develop a specific immune response to cancer cells in your body to fight the cancer. This is not a prevention. What's been done is not to prevent viral infections or to treat viral infections. It's never been done. We don't know. So I've been apprehensive about children receiving these injections, especially if we don't know the long-term side effects. Very, very apprehensive. But the thing that triggered my serious concern is a week ago when I heard that application is going to be made to the FDA for looking approval to use GMIs on 6-month-old children, 6-month-old children and up, from 5 down to 6 months of age. That now is broached to me. When you don't know what the long-term side effects are at all, you have no concept of what can possibly happen. When you have misinformation coming out of supposedly credible government sources concerning safety of this thing, it really is of concern to me. And so I want to speak out and raise my objection officially, and maybe other people will agree with me. Now, My recommendation as a seasoned researcher, as a clinician, as a father, as a pediatrician, as a child neurologist, is with the current GMIs in place, is I strongly recommend them for all adults to receive it. Right now in the United States, I think there are several million children have been immunized. Maybe it's a time to calm down. Maybe a time to stop with childhood immunization. See what happens. Start collecting the data. Maybe it's enough time. Less than 5? No. No. You have no information what's going to happen. That's particularly a vulnerable time period in a person's development. It should not be administered. Now, very, very important detail. Very important thing. Are there alternatives? Yes, there are alternatives. Novavax is a vaccine, done in the traditional fashion, okay? And that's been applied to the FDA for authorization for use. That could substitute very quickly in children if the FDA approves it, looks at the safety patterns. I don't know the details of the studies involved, but that's the way to go. There's another vaccination, again, a real vaccine being developed in India, pharmaceutical in India, one that would be in the nose, squirted in the nose. This would be the ideal form of immunizing for coronavirus, for COVID. It's primarily a respiratory virus transmitted through the respiratory system. And a lot of the illness is up in the upper respiratory tract. To produce an immune response locally, this IgA, secretory mediated, will be much, much more effective in terms of preventing the illness from establishing itself. And it will help tremendously decrease transmissibility. Where you have the immune system working where you want it to work. So there are alternatives, and that's approaching towards the end of their developmental phase. Now, I don't want to lambaste the GMIs. They're very important. They've been very, very important in the world in terms of controlling this pandemic. They're quick to produce. They can be done quickly and be distributed to billions of people relatively fast. The traditional vaccines take much longer. So these fill in a stopgap time period, and with other ones then being in development, things should then eventually transit over to Novavax and to similar related types of regular normal vaccines to be used down the road. So those are my recommendations, and I'm very concerned about this thing about 6-month-old children receiving GMIs. So that's one thing I wanted to state in this video today. The second thing that came up over the past several months related to a medication that's been controversial, ivermectin. Now, about a year and a half ago, when the President of the United States was talking about hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID, I thought, well, I know research, I know clinical studies, I can look this stuff up. I did. And my opinion was on the published results that this was not an effective treatment. Eventually, a proper large study was done, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, showing that it's not effective. And it does have side effects to the medicine. So it's not a benign thing, and it's really not effective. So when people asked me about it, I told them, well, hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, forget it. In the middle of August, this past August, friends of mine asked me what I thought about ivermectin, which I hadn't really paid much attention to, except I knew it was a little bit controversial at that time already. And I thought, well, okay, people are interested. I can certainly do a literature review and come up with my own opinion about it, my own evaluation. It turned out that in the middle of August, this article came out. It's a review article, American Journal of Therapeutics, published by a group from England, reviewing an analysis, a meta-analysis of many different studies looking at the use of ivermectin to treat COVID patients. Now, I went through this article. I looked up the references that they cited, went through those articles, and I looked at other articles I was able to find online related to it. And I do have a lot of experience in research and evaluating articles and publications. The studies are small. There are limits to the data that's collected. Things are not done in a consistently same fashion. There are criticisms like you can make about these things. But the impression I get that, yes, this is a medicine that seems to decrease mortality substantially and decrease need for hospitalizations. So based on what I saw here, it seems to work. And so as a clinician, I would feel very comfortable prescribing this to friends of mine for COVID infections. Now, these friends of mine requested me to obtain some of ivermectin for them to have on hand, just in case they needed to be treated. Well, surprise, surprise. Can't get my hands on it. Couldn't. Ivermectin is approved by the FDA as an antibiotic for parasitic infections. It is available in the United States. Why can't I get it? I'm a physician. I'm a licensed physician. I have a totally unrestricted license in the state of Illinois. I can write any prescription for any narcotic with no problem. I have DEA certification. I just renewed the license, the DEA license. I can write any medication, any narcotic, no problem. But I can't write for a antibiotic that is very little in the way of side effects. For an illness that I think the published literature supports its use for it. Now that's very strange. I deal with CVS and Walgreens here in Chicago, and going through both of them, it was blocked entirely. Could not get the medicine at all, completely, not allowed. Now, if I changed the diagnosis and I claimed that I needed it to treat patients with parasitic illnesses, well, then it ended up being a totally different kettle of worms, where I would only be allowed to get one dose of medication, a very small amount, not even enough to treat a COVID patient. And I would have to fill out forms and sign and document things. And basically the way it was structured and formed is that I would be jeopardizing my medical license if I filled out this form and did it. I could literally lose my medical license. And this is coming through the pharmacy companies, basically on orders of the CDC. I'm shocked. Now, this medicine, ivermectin, is very safe. In the studies that I looked at, has no side effects. And in administration for its effectiveness, you only give one dose early on in the disease, only one time, and it's effective. The total cost is less than $1. So you're talking with a medicine that's negligible cost, almost free, basically zero side effects. One dose treats it, and you have effect, and I can't get my hands on it. Well, you can criticize these articles. Yeah, I see limitations to them, yes, and you do need proper studies done, more extensive ones, properly. Double-blind, placebo-controlled would be ideal to do that. And those kind of studies are underway right now. Duke University has one across the United States. They're collecting the data. It's not available yet, but they're collecting the data. There's another study, independent one, going on in England by Oxford University, also looking at it. Those results will come in. But in the meantime, people are sick and they need medications. As a matter of fact, I got a call just before starting the videotape today. A friend of mine is sick, just tested positive for COVID, and I said, take the ivermectin that I provided for you. And she did. And hopefully she'll turn out fine. You know, the blockage here to me is incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible why this is. Now, you know, why? Well, you can blame, say something like, which is repeated constantly from CDC sources, and I see in the press constantly repeated, it's not FDA approved for COVID. Okay? That is utter, complete nonsense. It's actually a lie. It's beyond nonsense. It's lying. That you can't use it because it's not FDA approved. There's a thing called off-label use. Okay? And I sort of retired from clinical practice a decade ago, so my experience in child neurology goes back in time. Over my 30 years of providing clinical service to children, probably, I think the number would be very accurate, 80 to 85% of everything I prescribed was not FDA approved, not approved by FDA. These are primarily, I'm talking about anticonvulsants that were studied and approved for adults. And then we simply apply them to use them in children very effectively to prevent seizures, to treat them. Not FDA approved. Probably 80 to 85% of the medicines I prescribed was in that category. Is that bad? No. I saved children's lives by doing that. And I was a very good clinician. One of my colleagues, who I highly respect here, considered me the best child neurologist in Metro Chicago. So I know what I'm doing, and I did a very good job of it. There's nothing wrong with using things off-label. This is utter nonsense that you should not use it. You know, it has to be done under physician supervision, it has to be done with the correct dose. It's not simply any old dose. You know, it's very easy for patients, if they get their hands on, have no idea what they're doing, to overdose. That can happen. But if you talk about overdose, what about alcohol? How many people overdose on that? What about long-term consequences from that? Nobody's talking about making alcohol illegal in this country. Again, they're not doing it right now. Why not? Be consistent, at least. This issue is actually, when you put it in perspective, you know, really, really disturbing in terms of what the explanation behind it is. I don't want to, you know, do the adding of 2 and 2 together. I'll let you, the viewer, do that. Just recently, a medicine has been approved. I think another one will be, if it hasn't been already, 2 of them, for COVID. The results of which decrease mortality, decrease hospitalization rates, one of which costs $500 per patient. The other one costs $700. And at least in my review of the literature here, ivermectin produces a similar kind of a result for less than $1 per person. And with less side effects, because when you give 1 dose of a medicine, it's not quite the same as giving 5 to 7 days of a medicine. You have more risk of possible side effects. Is that one reason behind this thing? I don't know. But it actually is much worse, much worse than that. Over the same time period, I do have experience in Alzheimer's disease research. When I ran the Alzheimer's clinic at Mercy Hospital, I enrolled my patients in 3 different nationwide studies of medications to treat Alzheimer's disease patients. And so I not only as a researcher, but also in this particular specific area. When I heard about this new medicine, this intravenous antibody that's being administered to Alzheimer's patients, I looked up the literature that was published and what other information I could glean about it. And it certainly seemed to me that there wasn't anything there of clinical effectiveness. And so I didn't quite understand how this was, you know, going up through the approval process. A week ago in the journal Neurology, it was published by the American Academy of Neurology, is a special report, a lengthy report by a panel that the Academy requested to review this specific medication, what happened, and what the recommendations are. And so I refer you to that if you want to know all the detailed background of everything that's there. The brief summary is that the clinical studies that were done for this medicine were halted because of lack of clinical effectiveness. It's only in retrospect then statistical analysis showed that there might be some kind of an improvement at the higher dose given. And based on that, a request was made for FDA approval. The FDA then at the last stage convened a special panel of experts in Alzheimer's disease, 11 people who know the subject matter very well, to review it. 10 of them said no, there's not enough to use this medicine. 1 of the 11 was undecided. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're undecided, that's a 0, it doesn't count, same as not voting. It was basically a unanimous vote against the FDA approving this medicine. Okay? Now, what happened? It was approved. 3 of the panel members immediately quit in disgust of what happened at the FDA. And they made some rather inflammatory comments about possible motives. This medicine, just think about it in comparison, okay? It costs $56,000 a year per patient. That's just for the medicine alone. They have to add on top of it the intravenous administration once a month, all those costs involved, okay? Where the clinical effectiveness, at least as so far published, is basically non-existent, or very little to non-existent. Side effects, 30% develop brain swelling or cerebral hemorrhage, and many of them need to be hospitalized. This is not a 30% adverse side effect. Now that's a very dangerous medicine. Okay, now I can prescribe that. If you wanted to come here, we can set it all up. You just pay for it. We can have everything set up and do it. There's nothing limiting it except finances. So if we can compare it, here's a medicine that has little in the way of any kind of demonstrable clinical improvement. It's not there. On the other one, you have medicine that suggests you can save your life. A medicine that has serious side effects in 30% of patients. A medicine that have next to zero side effects. A medicine that costs $56,000 to start. A medicine that costs less than $1. One of which I can administer anytime, right now. Other one, I can't get my hands on it in the United States. Anyway, this is a very, very disturbing situation that's evolved and developed right now. Misinformation at the highest level involving the United States government authorities. And it's a much, much bigger problem than this, because what's done at the CDC gets mimicked across the world. It ends up being an international problem. And this is of tremendous concern to me. Tremendous concern. Thank you for your attention.